Hey guys, our first speaker is Bill Virtue. He's a practicing dentist in Yadkinville, North Carolina. He graduated from the Indiana University Dental School in Indianapolis, and in 2010 became board certified as a naturopathic physician from the American College of Integrative Medicine and Dentistry. He was president of this academy in 2012. He received his fellowship and is the current secretary on the executive council. Dr. Virtue.
Well, the information you're going to hear in our meeting is derived from science, delivered by clinicians, research scientists, and health professionals that are committed to improving and making healthcare safer for patients and the environment. That's what we're about. So the biological dentistry is not a separate recognized specialty. It's thought process and attitude that can apply to all facets of dental practice and to healthcare in general, to always seek the safest, least toxic way to accomplish the goals of modern dentistry and of contemporary healthcare. And that changes over time. You know, we use a composite with no BPA. Now, a lot of people use composites with that thinking, well, that's healthier than amalgam. It may be, but you still have to watch what's in your composites also. So we're going to talk about the science of mercury. And this is me at Joe's house, and you can see what I'm doing down there. I'm reading a map, which is, you can do it with Google, I'm told. But at any rate, I'm not the best IT guy. And I have a family history that got me into this deal. 25 years ago, I had an Aunt Vi, which is my mother's youngest sister, and she came down to North Carolina. We all grew up in South Jersey. My whole family's from Camden area. Thank God we're from Camden area. But she came down, and she had Lou Gehrig's disease, was diagnosed. And my Aunt Vi just laughed constantly. And every time she laughed, she'd open her mouth wide, and I could see all these mercury fillings. Well, at the time, we called them silver fillings, amalgams. And so I got to researching a little bit the connection between neuromuscular disease and perhaps mercury. And there was a connection there. So I have two cousins, which are my Aunt Vi's children, who have also died of Lou Gehrig's. So about 20 years ago, I decided I'm going to either have to change professions or change what I'm doing. So I decided to change what I'm doing. So that's why I'm here. That's what got me into this. And that's what got me into the IAOMT. And I've forgotten the exact year, but the IAOMT, through a friend of mine, a colleague, who was way ahead of me with mercury issues back then, Dr. Culp, he encouraged me to go to the meeting at Duke, which is not far from where we live, about an hour and a half. So I went, and as I said, it was the weirdest meeting I've ever been to for dentists. I mean, these guys had ponytails, Birkenstocks, and they were, I mean, seriously, they were talking about the toxicity of fluoride and the toxicity of mercury. I'm going, what are you guys, crazy? And again, there wasn't one picture of a tooth. Talking about toxicity of anesthetics, and I've never heard any of this stuff. I really thought it was wacky, but I thought that if I could follow this just to find out about the mercury, it might be beneficial to me, and I think it has been. So this is an interesting quote I found. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, or evidence of absence, yes. Meaning that just because you cannot particularly prove a connection doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So keep an open mind. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that ain't so. And that's a lot to do with what we're going to talk about this weekend.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Is mercury toxic?
Elemental mercury is toxic.
Silver amalgam fillings, does it contain mercury?
It does.
Almost up to 50%?
Yes.
Mercury is a toxic substance.
A lot of us have dental amalgams that contain mercury.
Oh, there's pictures of teeth.
Anywhere from 4 to 19 micrograms of mercury per day can leach out of your amalgams into your body.
This is
A
a
single
smoking tooth
filling
video.
delivers
I don't know if you've ever seen
micrograms
this.
of mercury, which in mercury terms is a lot.
Mercury is vaporizing from the amalgams, and you have 80% absorption through the lungs. This is a fairly dangerous scenario.
When dentists go to dental school, they're taught that mixed dental amalgam is completely inert.
They taught us nothing about protecting the staff from the dangers of mercury vapor.
The amount of mercury vapor that's released from amalgam restorations is so minute.
And so when a dentist goes in to grind out an amalgam filling, is creating tremendous quantities of mercury particulate.
Their dental drill runs at about 400,000 RPM, and it sends a shower of micron size and submicron size particles everywhere. It's tens of thousands of parts per million. I've never seen levels of mercury this high. That's pretty much unheard of in any type of work environment.
When a woman is pregnant, we hope that she's never exposed to mercury vapor because we know that it can pass the placenta and cause neurological problems in the unborn baby.
Everyone working around hazardous chemicals and other toxic substances has a right to know of possible dangers and how to protect themselves.
When patients see us dressed like this, there's no way they could believe mercury is safe in their mouths.
That's kind of scary, isn't it?
If you're exposed to mercury, we start seeing much more serious health effects. These health effects would be
Chronic fatigue, double vision,
Couldn't sleep, depression,
panic attacks, memory loss,
A lowered immune system,
loss of vision,
chronic headaches.
It's both an immediate problem in some individuals and a very long-term problem in others.
I started having neurological symptoms.
I didn't feel like a human being.
In the deepest part of myself, I thought I was dying.
People think you're crazy, and you're not crazy. You have mercury poisoning.
They'll evacuate a public building for a broken thermometer, but each one of your amalgam fillings has about the same amount of mercury.
2 schools will be closed tomorrow after a custodian finds a small amount of mercury in the floor of a room at Hickman Mills High School.
Now, how much mercury are we talking about? Not very much. About the amount the size of the eraser on this pencil, but school officials explained to us it would only take the amount of mercury about the size of the sharpened end of this pencil to contaminate the entire building.
The toxin that can do the effect, you have it placed within inches of your brain.
They've never done any safety studies on this product.
Why is it that the ADA will not tell the public that mercury amalgam is harmful?
Frankly, the American Dental Association welcomes new looks at all of the dental restorative materials.
The American people are being overtly lied to by the American Dental Association and the dental branch of the Food and Drug Administration.
Well, now we'll get started. Okay, the history of mercury fillings. Mercury-containing silver paste, the Chinese in the 7th century mixed with copper and tin and silver shavings, and they found this mercury product, the amalgam. Didn't know what to use it for, but it was interesting that they could put this together, mix it up, and it formed a paste that hardened. And then, interestingly enough, Augusta Travaux created the first amalgam filling by combining elemental mercury with shavings from silver coins. And that goes back to why silver coins have ribs on them. You know, the half dollars and dollars have little ribs on the sides, because what they would do, they'd shave the silver off these silver coins to get the silver, which the coins get smaller and smaller and smaller. So by putting ribs on them, you could tell whether this, and back then, remember, money had value. It wasn't inexpensive nickels but so they actually, if you took the silver away from the coin, it was worth less. In 1833, the Krakow brothers, 2 French brothers, immigrated from Great Britain to New York, and they set up the first, I guess you'd say, kind of commercial dentistry, where more of a clinic style. And this brings us to the first amalgam war. We'll start in 1833, when the Krakow brothers introduced mercury fillings. And at that time, you know that the barbers were kind of the dentists. The reason the barbers were dentists, because they had a chair that laid back, which made it pretty convenient to extract a tooth, and that's pretty much what they did. So amalgam fillings have been placed in millions of teeth for 200 years, which is quite a long time to use a product. It hasn't changed. In the fill, they may put some tin in there for expansion or something, but no real benefit from anything else. And in the 1850s, the American Society of Dental Surgeons banned the use of mercury fillings. So you could not be a member of the American Society of American Society of Dental Surgeons if you used mercury. So there was a split, and the people who used mercury, because it was easy to use and pretty practical at the time, formed the ADA, and the American Society of Dental Surgeons failed. But the interesting thing about that is today, if you don't use mercury, well, several years ago, you were kind of considered a quack. But back then, if you used mercury fillings, you were called a quack. And the quacksilver is German for mercury. So if you use mercury fillings, you were a quack. And now today, if you don't use them, they consider you kind of a quack. And that brings us to Mad as a Hatter. We all know that back in the felt days when they mixed mercury and wool, they created mercury, forget the exact mercury it was. Mercury chloride, was it? To create, excuse me? I'm sorry? Nitrate, okay, thank you. But they put this wool in these pots and they'd stir this stuff. He didn't stir it. And they're standing over that, absorbing and inhaling all this mercury vapor. So consequently, man as a hatter came from that. I don't know what we do for mercury today or for felt today, but I don't see a whole lot of it out there. So then came the Second World War, where Alfred Stock, a German chemist and pharmacologist, defined mercurialism. They did, these guys back then in those days, 1926, the equipment wasn't all that great, but they did a lot of research on themselves. They would ingest mercury and find out what kind of effects it had on them at the time. In 1931, German chemist Borinsky documented the daily excretion of mercury in feces and urine, doing it on himself. And some of these guys did it on lab animals too, to find out how much mercury came out when it went in. And the controversy lasted until World War II. And in Europe, they had bigger fish to fry, 1939, 1938, something in that area. So that mercury controversy kind of got tabled, and World War II erupted. And then the third mercury war happened in 1980s with Olympia Pinto in Brazil. Hal Huggins, who is now dead. I don't know if you guys know about Hal Huggins. He was a very interesting guy, a member of the Academy. And they introduced concerns about mercury toxicity. Of course, they weren't listened to at the time. Dr. Huggins lost his license because of mercury treatment and kind of practicing medicine without a license, which I'm not sure he did that. Matt Hansen, a Swedish neurobiologist, in 1982 began explaining mercury poisoning from dental amalgam, and then the IAOMT was founded in 1984 with the goal of producing science to convince dentists to eliminate mercury. And the controversy continues. I mean, it's not over. You know, I think 50% of dentists still use mercury, which is a heck of an improvement over the years, but there's still 50% too many using it. And 1926, chemist Alfred Stock defined mercurialism. 31, chemist Borinsky discovered urine and fecal excretion of mercury after placement of fillings. And I mentioned Olympia Pinto, he's from Brazil, Hal Huggins, and then the IAOMT was formed. Number of countries have banned it: Sweden, Denmark, Norway. Japan no longer teaches it in their dental school. So we are making progress. Significant dates in dental mercury, amalgam mercury. Usage in 1984, the National Institute of Dental Research and the ADA acknowledged mercury might be released from amalgam fillings. I think the might be is pretty interesting because it can be measured very easily being released from amalgam fillings. But at least they admitted that it could be released. The ADA enacted a resolution still part of the Code of Ethics today, prohibiting dentists from removing mercury fillings for toxicological reasons. Well, you know, I don't go into a big conversation with my patients about the toxicology of mercury. Most of them come in knowing that. So I'm really careful what I'm going to say, because I don't want to tell anybody, you have to get these mercury fillings removed, you're going to be sick, or you're going to have Alzheimer's or whatever. You can't say that, can't predict it. You don't know that. But what you can show people are the cracks in the teeth that mercury fillings have caused. I don't think I've ever removed a mercury filling from a tooth that didn't have a crack somewhere, and generally decay under it. So that's the direction I go. And a lot of people just don't want these ugly mercury fillings in there. And notice I'm not saying amalgam, they're mercury fillings. 50% of it is mercury, so it's a mercury filling. I went to Raleigh, which is our state capital, several years ago, defending myself. And trust me, it cost me over $10,000 in attorney fees so that I could say mercury filling. No, that's crazy. They didn't want me to say that. They didn't want me to say amalgam, silver, mercury. No, it's a mercury filling. So be careful what you say, because it can get you in a little trouble. The FDA Center for Devices and Radiation Health officially classified dental amalgam fillings as a Class 2 device, moderate risk, no proof of safety required. And the EPA is currently proposing standards for discharges of dental pollutants into publicly owned wastewater treatment plants. And that's one of the things that all of us have, is a mercury separator in our buildings so that none of the mercury goes out in streams and rivers. Well, 1% may. Fundamentals of mercury. We all know it's a heavy metal. Atomic number is 80. Atomic weight's 200. It's a metal at room temperature, the only one we know of. Gas vaporizes, colorless, odorless, tasteless. You don't know you're in a mercury environment. I mean, how many times, well, I'm older than you guys, but we had mercury thermometers, and we break them in the basement and watch that mercury scatter all over the floor, never thinking about it. Take a penny and rub it in the mercury and turn silver. Wasn't any concern whatsoever about the toxicity of mercury. Vaporizes easily above 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Doubles every 50 degrees, so we're running around 100 degrees. So it vaporizes very easily in our mouth, and I'll show you some slides later on about that. Very reactive, oxidizes very easily. And this is the ionic forms of mercury. Elemental mercury, you got metal from either liquid or vapor, 80% uptake in the lungs. So whatever mercury vapor is coming off your fillings, 80% takes up into the blood. Now, interesting, the bad part about that is when you're removing these mercury fillings, because that's when all the vapor is released. And as the patient's breathing, they're breathing it in, so is the dentist, so is the assistant. So the interesting thing about this, too, is why I want to know hygienists and assistants, because this just isn't a problem for the patient. Patient's only there for an hour or so. We're there, well, 40 years or so. So you got to be careful to protect yourself and your assistants, and also the hygienist. They're harder to convince than assistants. Mercurius, one positive charge, and Mercurius got 2 positive charges, 78 electrons. Inorganic mercury salt formed by oxidation of mercury, poor uptakes formed by oxidation of mercury, but it has poor uptake in the intestines, poor mobility, does not cross the blood-brain barrier, and it causes inflammation in the gut. So what we're really concerned about is, well, one of them is the mercury vapor. We got methylmercury formed by bacterial synthesis in the mouth and gut, 95% uptake in the intestines, good mobility and crosses the blood-brain barrier. You got ethyl mercury. Let me go back to that. Yeah, maybe I did wrong here. Let me try this. Well, I'm taking up Joe's time again. Okay, ethyl mercury. Thimerosal is a preservative in vaccines, and that's one of the things we, as the Academy's had a big against these mercury in the vaccines. The AMA comes out and says there's absolutely no problem with it. Well, we don't believe that. It's mercury and it's highly absorbed. What is methylation? It's a unique factor related to mercury exposure and individual response. Bacteria in soil and water convert mercury from the environment into methylmercury, which is why pregnant women and children have been advised to restrict consumption of certain types of seafood. Other forms of mercury might be altered into methylmercury inside the body. Studies have demonstrated or documented that the ability of mercury in the human system, such as that from amalgam fillings, to be transported into methylmercury in the mouth and by specific strands of yeast and bacteria in the gut. So it methylates in the body. So once you get mercury vapor, it's going to be absorbed in the body either through the vapor or methylization. Why the issue of methylization is essential to consider? Because humans are exposed to inorganic mercury from dental amalgams, food, industrial pollutants, potential mercury methylation by the human gut microbe would then have tremendous health implications. So it sounds like we're kind of surrounded by mercury. The role of selenium has the strongest affinity for mercury. Sulfur also very, very strong. If mercury binds to selenium before it enters the body, it will be less toxic. One of the reasons that fish seem to survive in heavy mercury environments is because the mercury they're high in selenium, and the mercury binds to the selenium, which is in the nervous system, so it's not as much in the meat of the animal. If mercury binds to selenium after it enters the body, it will become more difficult to remove. Are mercury contaminated fish toxic? So as I said earlier, selenium is an antioxidant which binds oxygen and protects against the free radical damage from certain chemicals that can cause cancer. Fish are high in selenium. Mercury binds to the selenium, which provides protection to the fish and makes the selenium-bound mercury harder for humans to absorb. I'm careful how much fish I eat. I'll eat a little bit of tuna once in a while. Not that I don't like it, but I'm just concerned about exposing myself to any more mercury. Yes? Selenium? Don't know, maybe. Yeah, might be a good idea. They're good anyway. Mercury in fish is already reactive with proteins and other protective molecules. The mercury bound selenium is not as toxic as an equal amount of the pure equivalent. So that's maybe you need some Brazil nuts. Fish binds mercury to selenium, which is a stronger bond than sulfhydryl or thiol groups, which we're full of. For mercury toxicity, genetics, unsusceptibility, and synergistic effects. And mercury's affinity for sulfur. And it forms covalent bond with sulfur. More than 99% of enzymes contain sulfur. That's an important fact right there. That mercury has a strong affinity to. Mercury will bind to sulfur groups and disrupt the function of the enzyme. Many of these sulfur-containing groups are detoxification functions. So once the mercury binds to the enzyme is still there and it can be measured, but it no longer, the key in the lock no longer fit. So in other words, the enzyme can be measured, but it's not effective. Has affinity for methionine, cysteine, cysteine. When mercury binds to an enzyme, the enzyme no longer functions. And 99% of our enzymes have mercury, so it doesn't take a whole lot of mercury to disaffect the enzyme. Relative toxicity of heavy metals. It's interesting, we always thought lead was the culprit. Arsenic, boy, that's bad stuff too. But in fact, mercury is more toxic. Cadmium in cigarette smoke. Arsenic. Thallium. And lead down there. Doesn't mean it's good for you, but it's not as toxic as the other four. This is an old article of Newsweek. I don't know if you guys remember, maybe some of you do, some of you don't, when they actually got lead out of paint. I used to paint houses going through dental school and undergraduate. We were just in the era where they were taking lead out of paint. And it was kind of back then, it was just like we had to start using gloves. You can't paint something without having lead in the paint. Kids won't work, it will never happen. Well, paint's better than ever, and we've learned how to use gloves. Maybe some of you don't remember not using gloves. Does anybody here remember that? When we didn't wear gloves? All right. I mean, the surgeons wore them forever, and how you could dissect tissue in the body and with gloves on and think you couldn't work on a tooth with a glove is kind of crazy. What happens when you combine the lethal dose of one of mercury and lead? 100 times more toxic. So when we're looking at some of these water supplies and the acidity of the water pulling the lead out, and then you get situations with fluoride and you get situations with mercury, makes for a really toxic stew. Combined effects in toxicology is a rapid. Now here's current exposure matter. It's all about the, I don't expect you to be able to read all that. It's a little difficult, but current exposures matter. It's all about the synergy. Exposures to other metals and chemicals can also influence how a person responds to mercury. And this is the mitochondria there. And mercury shuts down the mitochondria. And then reactive species for about 28 days. This is Tom McGuire's work. He's got a book out called Poison in Your Teeth, and he will be here tomorrow at the exhibitors, so I invite you to go by and see him and everybody else in there. Mercury is the most poisonous, non-radioactive, naturally occurring substance on the planet. So it's the most poisonous, non-radioactive. Plutonium would probably be more poisonous, naturally occurring subject. There's no safe or harmless level of mercury. Just one atom of mercury is harmful to the body. And one atom of mercury isn't much. Amalgam fillings continuously release poisonous mercury vapor the entire time they're in the mouth. And then they crumble and they fall out and they get replaced with another mercury filling. Any form of stimulation that heats an amalgam filling will increase the release of mercury vapor. That includes bruxing, hot tea, coffee, chewing, anything that friction or hot liquids will increase the release of the mercury vapor. Mercury fillings are the single greatest source of mercury exposure. That means mercury fillings are the single greatest source of mercury exposure because we all think about, oh my goodness, we shouldn't eat fish. Well, you'll see in a minute, that's way down the line of where you're getting your mercury. And we also get it from coal plants in the air. The first exposure to mercury from mercury fillings can occur at the moment of conception. In other words, mom's got mercury fillings, and mercury is circulating her body, and the fetus is going to pick that up. Mercury passes through the placenta of the fetus and through breast milk from the nursing mother. So one thing we always advise we don't do is ever remove a mercury filling while mom's nursing or pregnant. Now, sometimes you have to make an exception. If she's got an emergency, you may have to do something, but make sure it's minor and try to reduce as little of that mercury filling as you can. Chronic mercury poisoning can directly and indirectly contribute to increase the risk and severity of every every known disease and health issue. Number of mercury atoms in a microgram. Well, this is an interesting chart. You see 1 ounce has got like 28 grams. 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. 1 milligram is 1,000 micrograms. And if you look down at the bottom of there, you can see that 1 microgram has got 4 trillion mercury atoms. Now, I said earlier, 1 atom can affect your body. Well, you're looking at 4 trillion atoms with a very small amount of mercury. And that means all 4 trillion of those can affect an enzyme system, making it useless. Yes?
For the nursing mother emergency, is there any guidelines for like pump and dump?
Yeah, but I usually advise that if it's an emergency, we'll get them medicated, get them comfortable, and then see what we need to do. But if you're pregnant, you can't do that. So, we don't have too much trouble with that. And if we have to do something, there are plenty of protections that we use. But the problem in today's litigating society is that if that baby were to come out and have some defect, it could be because you did this. So you got to be careful. Conscious sedation the same way. You don't want to do that on a pregnant mother or a nursing mother, because even though these drugs are extremely safe, litigation could occur. You can't prove or disprove it. And this is an interesting slide. Now, what this is an electron micrograph, but what it's showing you, this is a surface. Hey, I got a laser too. Cool. This is the surface of the amalgam filling, and what you're seeing here is undissolved mercury globules that were titurated, but didn't completely dissolve inside the mixture. So as this wears down, these mercury globs are exposed, and that's how they evaporate into the mouth. So that's off-gassing. It's occurring all the time. The more you chew, the more hot liquids or whatever, the more the mercury comes off. And the ADA even admits this, which is really cool. And they also admit that, fluoride taking systemically has no effect on decay anyway, either. Okay, amalgam mercury fillings are often referred to as silver fillings. We hear that a lot. Composed of 50% mercury and 50% combination of silver, copper, tin, and zinc. We all know it's created by Crick's mixing in a titurator. And a major reason for biological dentistry is needed because of mercury fillings. Chemistry in the ADA tells us when combining many components, the compound should be named based on the largest ingredient. So that's why we call them mercury fillings. And this is from Diversalloy. This is what their MS, they changed the name of that. It used to be MS, what was it? MSDS. It's a new name now. I don't know what it is. Anyway, this is in the box. Shouldn't be used in expectant mothers, children under 6, interproximal or occlusal contact to dissimilar metals. We were taught that in dental school. But how many times you take a crown off, there's mercury filling under it, on either a gold or PFM crown. It's all the time. Patients with severe renal deficiency, known allergies to mercury. It's estimated 7% of our population or higher is allergic to mercury. For retrograde or endodontic fillings, endodontists used to always send I don't ever do a retrograde anymore because they don't work, number one, and we don't like to do root canals, but that mercury filling is shoved up in the bone, which is not a good place for it, and as a filling material for cast crowns. All right. Oh, that's an SDS now, safety data sheets, formerly known as MSDS, are required by OSHA to protect workers by supplying them with the most crucial facts about the hazardous materials at their job site, including the physical properties of the material, proper storage and handling techniques, known health risk, and essential emergency procedures. Manufacturer of amalgam fillings must create these information sheets. Okay, inhalation of mercury vapor, dust or organic vapors, or skin irritant absorption. Mercury over the long periods can cause mercurialism. Symptoms include tremors, inflammation of the mouth and gums, excessive foul salivation, stomatitis, blue lines on the gums, amalgam tattoos, pain and numbness in extremities, weight loss, mental depression, and nervousness. Exposure may aggravate kidney disorders, chronic respiratory disease, nervous system orders. It sounds like everything's being blamed on mercury. I'm not quite sure it is, but this is one thing. I had a list like this on my website, and the North Carolina Dental Society made me take that off. That was one of the other agreements we came to. They're not nice people to deal with. You ever been down to your state board? They're sitting up here like this big wooden bench, and they're looking down, and you're sitting down there like that, and it's like you're a peon, and you're supposed to pray to these people or something for relief. I don't know. It was an interesting. I enjoyed it. I didn't think I enjoyed it, but it was an interesting experience to go through. You act like I was some kind of criminal because I thought mercury was poisonous. But all right, first aid measures. Adverse symptoms may include the following: reduced fetal weights, increase in fetal deaths, skeletal malformations, salivation, metallic taste, eye irritation, respiratory tract irritation, coughing. Maybe that's wrong with me. Pulmonary edema, wheezing and breathing difficulties, headache, fever, nausea, vomiting, blah, blah, blah. Hazardous classifications, very toxic by inhalation, toxic may cause harm to the unborn child, toxic, dangerous, serious damage to the health by prolonged exposure through inhalation. What do we do all day long? Prolonged health through inhalation. Disposable consideration must not be disposed of together with household garbage. Do not allow products that reach sewer system. Well, like I said earlier, when it's toxic waste when you take it out, why isn't it toxic waste when you put it in? Interesting. Another thing the Academy is doing right now, we're starting to work with dental school. We're not starting to, we have been actually. And tomorrow, interestingly enough, I'll be lecturing again in the morning to students. We got, I think, 10 students or something. We sponsor them to come in. We did it at the last meeting. And what we're hoping to do is create awareness when these students early on. They're going to be careful if they go back and report, but you do want to graduate. That's very important. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It does. Well, even when I was in school, we had to put an excess, what we didn't use in the mouth, put it in a little jar of oil. You know, it's like, well, why are you doing this? I mean, here you are walking out of the place with amalgam filling. No, it doesn't make any sense. And the other thing, as mentioned in dental schools, there's absolutely no precautions whatsoever. At IU, I think we had, 50 chairs in the main clinic, something maybe more. And every one of them, half the time we turned the water off because we didn't have an assistant. We're grinding the thing, the whole room's full of it. We went up there with a mercury vapor analyzer. They weren't very happy about trying to use it. I can see why. Okay, hazardous identification, classification, we've already talked about that. Chronic inhalation of mercury vapor causes mercurialism. Findings are extremely variable and include tremors, shakes, salivation, again, blue teeth lines, it's blamed for a whole host of things. Most of it's, I'm sure, true. I'm not sure about all of it. High copper amalgams, this is interesting. High copper amalgams actually increase the off-gassing of the mercury. It's showing a single spill. High copper amalgam filling releases roughly 300 micrograms initially after placement and almost 800 micrograms of mercury in the first week. This is several 100% more than mercury that was when it was not high copper amalgams released during the first few days of placement. So high copper is even worse than the old style. Mercury fillings with high copper. In 1975, high levels of copper were added to amalgam fillings. 76 increases in autoimmune disorders, specifically onset of ALS. And I told you my aunt and it might have been 3 of her children died. They live up in Jersey. I don't really see them or haven't seen them in years. I saw them as kids, but that was about it. Incidence of multiple sclerosis drastically increased. And here's the oral galvanism, which we all had in school. I mean, I don't care how far back you go, they're going to talk about that. And we were taught never to do, excuse me. I'm getting better with this, but I'm not quite up to speed. You can see right here, you got 2 dissimilar metals together. It looks like a new mercury. But a direct current of electricity, especially when produced by chemical action, you got a warm, wet environment. Routinely we take some sort of metal crown off and it's got mercury under it. I guess they don't do it as much now with ceramic crowns because it tends to darken the tooth a little bit. Oral galvanism and electric currents produced by chemical action in the mouth. And dental textbooks have included references to oral galvanism for decades. And when I was in school, Ralph Phillips was our materials guy. And boy, you didn't want to catch a lecture after lunch with him. Jeez, he'd put you to sleep. But even then, he told us not to do that. But we do it all the time. I don't, but the profession does it all the time. Currents in the oral cavity are measured in microamps. The brain operates on nanoamps. very easy for mercury fillings in the mouth to overwhelm the electrical that the brain needs. And you got stuff up here, stuff down here. Who knows? Even with the amalgam mercury fillings, they're not all the same consistency, so that can create galvanism within the mouth. Produce 1,000 times, mercury fillings produce 1,000 more amperage than the amperage required by the brain. That's kind of scary. And not to mention, these things are placed within inches of your brain, so the mercury vapor is very easily exposed. I remember years ago, ever remember Johnny Carson? Yeah, surely some of you do. I'm dating myself. But Lucille Ball was on there one time, and she was talking about, she actually heard radio signals, voices in her head. And everybody thought that was like, whoa, you're weird. But probably due to the galvanism with a logical explanation. And I've had patients tell me the same thing. And interesting, when you get these patients in, also understand that a lot of times, many times, they know a whole lot more about this than I do, and than you will probably too. So you got to take extra time with these people. They require it. They've done a lot of research. They came in off our website. They've read reams of information, and you're like the last chance. It's like nobody else listens to me. Everybody thinks it's in my head. I'm crazy. Well, you're right. It is in your head. It's the mercury fillings. So you got to treat these people a little differently. They've been through hell. They have, many of them. Can't work, can't sleep, can't function. This is Skinner, again, of Phillips, which was my materials guy. According to Skinner and Phillips, the insertion of mercury restorations directly in contact with a gold crown would be contraindicated. Mercury in tooth roots and in jaw bones found fourfold increase in the amount of mercury per gram of tissue weight of dentin where a gold crown was placed over a mercury filling.
Here's the potato clock. It's a science project toy that is meant to show the power of combining metals to create electricity. We'll use it today to show the power of combining metals in a person's mouth to create a potato clock in your head. Here are two potatoes, each with a zinc and a copper strip embedded in them. It takes 2 cells of zinc and copper to run this little digital clock. When you hook them all up, the potato clock starts to run. Got it? Here's a variety of dental metals that are embedded in a potato, ready to go. This one is a pure titanium implant. This one is a titanium alloy implant. Here is a lump of amalgam. This one is the remnant of a Maryland bridge, a nickel chromium alloy. Here is the remnant of a crown, porcelain fused to mystery metal. Here is an ingot of high gold content, crown and bridge gold. And here is a bridge of porcelain fused to some kind of yellow crown and bridge gold. Here is one copper and zinc cell, and here is another potato with the variety of dental metals that we just described embedded into it. Let's see what happens when we hook them up. Here is a pure titanium implant, and here is some gold. We get a potato clock. Yes, we are. Here's another gold alloy, and it is lighting up. A mystery gold alloy. And there we go. We get the contact. Here is a titanium alloy implant versus yellow gold, and that lights up the potato clock. Here's some crown and bridge gold. Here's a white gold alloy. And here's some amalgam. And you'll notice that the two electronegative metals do not light up the potato clock. Here is a remnant of a Maryland bridge, a nickel chromium alloy. And that lights up the potato clock. And gold. And the white gold. There we go. What What about amalgam? Here is a lump of amalgam. What does that do with a pure gold alloy? It's the potato clock. Your crown and bridge gold, a white gold alloy. What about titanium alloy versus amalgam? No. Two electronegative metals. We dentists pick metals for people's dental restorations on the basis of their mechanical properties and their durability, but we rarely take into account the electrical properties of the metals. This little demonstration shows how by randomly selecting metals for people's dental restorations, it's the equivalent of creating a potato clock in their heads.
That was Steve Coral. He's passed now, but he was a member of our academy for many, many years. A great guy. First mercury concentration measured after removal of the amalgams was higher than the baseline for 7 of the subjects. Values returned to baseline by the next measurement. The increase was attributed to exposure of the subject to additional mercury during grinding of the amalgam. The study by values was not included in the final analysis. Now this is an interesting graph, and it's a little hard to follow because you got to look up here and this is unstimulated, meaning there was 3 different tests, and these are a while back, and we realized that. And the measurements, the equipment monitoring, the number of mercury fillings, and that kind of thing affected these values. So even though Gay's got a great big graph here, this person might have had fewer amalgam fillings. But what they did, they measured in your breath the mercury coming off without chewing, without stimulating the amalgams. And you can see, and this was, let's see, with amalgams, down here, these people had amalgams, these folks without amalgams. Now, why they'd measure any mercury is interesting to me if they didn't have any mercury fillings. But we didn't have any. This was done independently. We didn't have any control over the experiment. So this is with chewing. Now, let's go back here for a second and notice that we've got a 1.6 measurement here of microgram, and we go forward, we've got 13.1. Now, we don't know how long they chewed in these studies or how many amalgams they have, but you can see a significant difference in chewing, stimulating, and not chewing. And estimated unstimulated mercury release per day, this without chewing, this is just off-gassing in the mouth, 30.4, let's go by that graph, and chewing, after a day's worth of chewing, I guess that's 3 meals or whatever, was 226, so significant increase in mercury release with chewing or stimulation. Now here's a little graph that also shows this is the mercury being measured after chewing, so we allow the person to chew for 30 minutes and then stop, and then you can see, I guess they were chewing gum, and then slowly does the mercury come down, but even after an hour, the mercury is still quite high. So chewing definitely stimulates the mercury to come out of these fillings. Articles of interest, we got mercury vapor inhalation inhibits binding of GDT to tubulin in a rat brain, stimulating Alzheimer's lesions. Dental silver tooth filling, the source of mercury exposure relieved by whole body image scan. I'll show you that in a minute by Vinnie Murray. And whole body images of the distribution of mercury released from dental fillings into monkey tissue. All right, now this is Dr. Murray's or Dr. Vinnie's study. He was one of the founding members of IAOMT. But full body scan of a sheep. Now what they did is they made radioactive mercury, which doesn't exist. What did I do here? Hit the button. Okay. Radioactive mercury doesn't exist in nature. So it's an isotope that they made specifically for this experiment. And then they put mercury fillings in these sheep for 9 days, and then they sacrificed the animal, and then they did a scan on them. And you can see where the mercury is going to concentrate. Now here's the jaw. This is the kidney, stomach, and liver of the animal. I guess they got 3 stomachs, I guess it is, because the A is there, and there. But you can see the concentration of mercury after 28 days. You can see the numbers aren't particularly significant to me, but I mean, you can see that mercury went from here to here in the body. And then they said because that was a sheep, the people who were against the idea of mercury being poisonous decided, well, that's a sheep, and they're a lot different than we are because they chew differently. So what they did, repeated the experiment on monkeys, which are pretty similar animals to us, and the same kind of thing you can see here. The mercury is concentrating throughout the body, but pretty much in the gut. So pregnancy in children, we asked that question earlier. Scientific research has shown the number in maternal mercury fillings increases high levels of fetus and infants. Number two, increased number of maternal mercury fillings increases of breast milk. Risks that do not take size or development of children into account. So basically what we're saying is pregnant mothers should not have, or nursing mothers should not have their mercury fillings messed with, if you can avoid it. Both the Environmental Protection Agency and National Academy of Science state that between 8 and 10% of American women have mercury levels that would render any child they give birth to neurological disorders. That's kind of scary. And that includes autism. And we have information on that. Both the Environmental Protection Agency and National Academy of Science state that between 8 and 10%, I just said that one. Didn't I? Yeah. Okay. I pushed the wrong button. This is the CAT test. These are two studies conducted in 1997 to 2005, used to defend the use of mercury fillings in children. Other research has demonstrated factors such as long-term effects, genetic predisposition, and measurement errors could have been taken into account by the CAT. Research, including some of the original CAT researchers studying the same cohort, have since identified potential risks of these subjects for mercury exposure based on gender, genetic predisposition, and even gum chewing. Now, this was done on children and long-term study, but what they found was that the information was reversed later on when it was studied. And I think that that really is perhaps no place for mercury in children. I would have to agree with that. Back in 1980s, the ratio of children with autism was about one child in 160. Now it's something like it was one in 160 now. Back then it was 1 in 500,000. So that's our belief. So if it went from 1 in 500,000 to 1 in 160, our belief is that the preservative in the vaccines is causing this, because by age 2, these kids have gotten 22 vaccines, and they say now that they've removed a lot of the mercury, but some of this we believe, and it could be a combination of fluoride, it could be mercury from the mother. I mean, we don't know what's causing it exactly, but we know it's changed. Facts from government agencies: dental amalgam is the greatest source of mercury burden in the non-occupationally exposed population, but that doesn't include us because we are occupationally exposed. In fact, we're the only industry that OSHA doesn't regulate. You can't make switches, you can't make fluorescent light bulbs without OSHA inspecting how much mercury has been released into the workplace. But with dentists, they don't seem to care. There's nobody coming in and measuring mercury in your office. And, OSHA's for employees. So if you're incorporated, the doctor is also underneath OSHA as well as the staff. But they don't seem to care about us. Yes? 1 in 60? Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, there's no question it's very male dominant. But we don't know for sure if it's the thimerosal, but probably is. But it's a toxic soup, so some kind of combination is affecting it. 1991, dental amalgam is the greatest source of mercury burden in the non-occupationally exposed population. The daily exposure for mercury, according to WHO, is between 3 and 17 micrograms, and 10 being the average mercury exposure per day. Now, that's back in 1991. That's the World Health Organization. Health Canada, 1996, maximum tolerable intake of mercury would be released with 4 average-sized fillings, 8 surfaces for a 154-pound adult, based on industrial safety levels. How many people have more than 8 surfaces of mercury filling? Source of human mercury exposure, World Health Organization again. You can see that this piece of the pie is amalgam. This is air and water, and this is the seafood we eat. So by far the largest percentage is coming from dental amalgam. Combination of mercury exposure from fish and amalgam. The estimated exposure to inorganic mercury in Europe from the diet alone does not exceed the world deadly elements. Tolerable weekly intake. Inhaled elemental mercury from, excuse me, mercury from dental amalgam, which after absorption is converted to inorganic mercury, is an additional source that is likely to increase the internal inorganic mercury exposure. So the tolerable weekly intake, tolerable weekly intake might be exceeded. Well, it might be. I'm certain it is. Okay, this is public estimates of mercury exposure in adults with dental mercury fillings, and this is the limit, and you can see where the numbers here really add up. So we saw that Patterson study early on, but that's way over the line, and I guess that's more than 4 surfaces. Why mercury-free, mercury-safe in biologic dentistry? It may cause harmful effects to the nervous, digestive, respiratory, immune system, and to the kidneys, besides causing lung damage. Maybe that's what I got going on here. Adverse health effects from mercury exposure can be tremors, impaired vision and hearing, paralysis, insomnia, emotional instability, development defect. I mean, just a whole host of stuff. You can throw everything at that, I guess. No threshold below which some adverse effects do not occur. Richardson study, updating exposure, re-examining references, exposure levels, and critically evaluating recent studies. It was determined that by some 67.2 million Americans would exceed the mercury dose associated with a reference dose of 0.3, established by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Oh, thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Mercury-induced vascular toxicity and impairment of angiogenesis. This is a Paranundy study from the Ohio State University. He's lectured here many times. Transitional heavy metals attached to lipids in the endothelium of the blood vessel, altering lipid signaling mediators. Prostaglandins are released, causing inflammation and tears in the membrane. Plaque forms to repair the damage. You know, when that plaque forms to repair the damage, whether it's a lack of vitamin C, some people believe it's localized scurvy that causes these plaques to form, or it could be mercury vapor. Mercury causes cytotoxicity in the vascular epithelium. And methyl mercury causes mitochondrial damage. We know that. Mercury effects on nerve fibers. And demyelinization of nerve fibers can lead to disease such as multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, ALS, mental illness, and depression. What happens to 80% of mercury vapor absorbed into the body from dental amalgam fillings, absorbed by the lungs and passed to the rest of the body, particularly the brain, kidney, liver, lung, and gastrointestinal tract. The half-life of metallic mercury varies depending on the organ where the mercury was deposited in a state of oxidation. I apologize. I can't get it to stop. Comes and goes. Example, half-lives of mercury in the whole body and kidney regions have been estimated at 58 days, whereas mercury deposit in the brain can have a half-life of up to several decades. Symptoms of mercury exposure. Well, I mean, you get all these kind of things, and I'm sure many of them, and not everybody gets all this just because they have mercury vapor, but you got weight loss, you got hair loss, you got nerve response, immune impairments for sure, headaches, endocrine disruption, that's for sure, thyroid problems, dermatological conditions, it's just a whole host of things mercury can affect. Have been scientifically linked to these health issues for scientific research. The IAOMT's position statement against dental amalgam for our research library, and you can see even Alzheimer's, autism spectrum, complaints of unclear causation, Parkinson's disease, reproductive dysfunction, periodontal disease, multiple sclerosis, hearing loss. Man, how many dentists have hearing loss? I don't know if it's through the high-speed handpiece or the mercury, but after a while, you'll notice it. I've been, Well, I thought somebody had a question. Yeah. Right. Huh? That's one of my favorite words. Huh? Genetic predisposition and dental mercury risk. Mercury exposure from dental mercury amalgam threatens people with genetic variants that can impact the response of the CPOX4 and APOE 2, 3, and 4 actually. Well, not so much 2, but 3 and 4. Recent research has identified predisposition to neurological impacts by mercury exposure from dental amalgam in male children with CPOX4. Other genetic traits that have been examined for health impairments caused by mercury exposure include methylthionine, polymorphism, and variants and just mutations and different things that go on down the line. Genetic susceptibility to mercury, why aren't we all dead? That's a good question. Allele-protein E is a genotype as a potential biomarker for mercury toxicity. And allele-protein APO4 is reduced mercury. These are proteins that circulate in your spinal fluid and for cholesterol movement. And an APO4 has got 2 arginine molecules on it. And remember, arginine it has no sulfur group. So when you go down to the APO2, it has 2 cysteine molecules on it. Well, remember, cysteine is a sulfur group, thiol group, and so it has the greatest affinity for mercury. So what we're saying here, well, not we, but what the research is showing, is an APO4 person has a very high affinity for Alzheimer's disease because they have a very low detoxification percentage. An APO3 would have a cysteine and an arginine on that molecule, and then the APO2s, which is, those folks don't get Alzheimer's because they're able to get the mercury out of their body. And you always see, when you do look at these things, you have an autistic child, and the mother will come in and say, well, have you ever checked for mercury? And I go, yeah, they did a hair sample. They always come in very low in mercury because they don't excrete. The body's hoarding the mercury. It's storing it. So if you do that test and it says you don't have any hair in your mercury in your hair, it does not mean you don't have mercury in your body. You're either a secretor or not a secretor. And if you have mercury in your sweat, it's probably a good thing. I mean, because you're getting rid of it. You're not just hoarding it. The 90-year-old patient's mouthful of amalgams, healthy the whole life. I mean, we see that all the time. People who smoke all their life don't have lung cancer. You know, the wife gets it. But we have a lot of folks come in, old 90-year-old people that have, they still got their teeth. They're not pretty, but they've had mercury fillings their entire life and not affected by them. They're probably APO2. Allergies to dental mercury, approximately 21 million Americans are likely allergic to mercury. Mercury allergy is known to be on the rise because perhaps we're getting more mercury. The more something you get, the more likely you are allergic to it. Most dental patients are not tested for mercury allergies. We don't test them for that. Health conditions linked to dental mercury allergies include autoimmune disorders, fatigue, multiple chemical sensitivities, oral lichenoid lesions, and even infertility. A number of patients with health conditions linked to dental mercury or dental metal allergies improve or recover after the filling is removed. And a lot of times that's more of an electrical change than it is a biological change. Biological responses after mercury removal. Mercury has a time-dose relationship. The longer you have it, the more you inhale, more the body builds up, and amalgam is not stable. It's a battery. This thing is moving on me here. Yeah, there's better. People respond in 1 of 5 ways when you remove the mercury fillings. Either no health changes, or the worst, if removed improperly. In other words, you have taken all the mercury fillings out without any precautions. That means they've absorbed a lot of mercury vapor. Better health after detoxification. We work with a lot of physicians in our area, alternative physicians, that will go ahead after we remove the mercury, then they'll start detoxifying the patient with different materials, IVs, and even diet can do it. We always advise our patients after removal, eat a lot really high sulfur diet, which would be cabbage, broccoli, onions, garlic, eggs, because that's got a lot of sulfur in it, and the sulfur helps pull that mercury out of the body. We also, once we remove mercury fillings, now everybody they don't care about this. They come to us, half our patients are biologic, the other half just need a dentist. So with the folks that are interested and they'll go along the program, we give them packs of vitamin C. They take 1 pack every hour after they leave us, and that helps to detoxify their blood immediately after the removal. Because we use all the precautions, but still, it's not perfect. They're going to, and we are going to absorb some mercury. A better health immediately upon amalgam removal. That was probably galvanism. So if this person gets up, I've had so many reports where people go, not in my office so much, but I mean, you hear these reports of people get up, they couldn't walk, they're in a wheelchair, and they get their mercury fillings and they walk out of the building. I'm thinking, well, that might be a little bit strange, but they do feel, and they'll come back to me and say, look, it took a couple days, but I feel so much better. It happens, but they don't generally dance out. And some better after amalgam removal and more after physician detox, which is kind of an electrical and a mercury thing too. Yes. Oh, as long as they want to. Yeah. I just tell them to do that. It's a great, inexpensive detox. Because, after these people pay for a lot of this dentistry, they have to go to the physician and sit there for an hour and a half of vitamin C or EDTA or whatever they're going to use to decant, because they usually use EDT to get the lead out. But it just depends. I mean, it's a great way, inexpensive way to kind of keep detoxing. And, we found the eggs aren't as dangerous as they used to be now. The yolks are good for us, so eat them. Review of current allowable uses of mercury in the U.S. Light bulbs, we know that, but they're kind of dying out. These LEDs are taking over, thank God. Use a lot less power, and they don't make much heat, and there's no mercury. Because the fluorescent light bulbs, they started coming in those little round curly things and screw in. You break one of those things, you're in trouble. And how do you get rid of them? You can't throw them in the trash. You got to recycle them. So thank God LEDs coming in. Mercury fillings, every time that stuff's removed, it's got to go into, 40 to 60% of it goes into streams and rivers. It just goes into the septic system, and there's no way to, we'll talk about that in a bit, to get the mercury out. Flu shots, again, thimerosal, the preservative in the flu shot. Boy, I don't get flu shots. I don't get the flu, but it's only 25% effective this year. Isn't that crazy? Go through all that expense and trouble, it's only 25% effective. Numerous manufacturing processes by making chlorine bleach and caustic soda. Okay, some regulations. Ban, restriction, and or limitations as an air pollutant, discharge into waterways. Now this is industry, this isn't dentistry. Levels in drinking water, paper food packaging, guidelines for shellfish consumption, paints and pesticides. I don't know if it's still being used, but one of the things they do for boats is you got to paint the hull every few years. Well, it's done with a mercury-containing paint, and the mercury kills the fungus and other goodies that like to collect at the bottom of a boat. And mercury batteries, excuse me, toys and jewelry, and switches and thermometers, measuring devices. The heat and air conditioning switch on your wall has a mercury switch in it. If you ever take the cover off, you can see this little silver bottle goes back and forth when the heat comes on or comes off. I wish it worked in my room. Good God, it was 80 degrees in there. I had the thing turned down to 60. I'm going to have to call them. We're the only industry in the U.S. that is not required to prevent mercury waste from entering the environment. Again, I've said that a couple times. 60% of mercury reaching treatment facilities. I think that's what that said, wasn't it? Yeah, it's from dental offices. 28 tons of mercury is entering our environment per year because of all dental offices do not have specialized separating units. And it's estimated between a half pound and a pound of mercury a year recycles from these separators. It's a very simple thing. We'll talk about that in a little longer, but if everybody were to put one in, it would really cut down. I think it's something like 28 tons that we could actually remove from the environment. And that's an interesting topic because years ago, the IAOMT was trying to get dentists, we're talking really trying to market to the dentists to start picking this information up and using it. But what we found out was the right way to go about this is the environment. Because once you put it in somebody's mouth, and you'll see in a minute, it's going to go into the environment. So it's just not a health issue for that person, it's a health issue for the world.
Mercury is one of the most toxic elements and a persistent traveler through our environment. So who's the travel agent for this elemental poison? Coal-fired power plants? Most definitely. Mining operations? Of course. Your neighborhood dental office? Surprisingly, yes. The United Nations Environment Program reports that 10% of global mercury usage is for amalgam tooth fillings. This results in up to 340 tons of dental mercury journeying into the environment each year. In the United States, dentists are currently the largest users of elemental mercury. This accounts for roughly 32 tons of mercury used yearly to place amalgam restorations, otherwise known as silver fillings. Although the number of amalgams placed has decreased over the last few decades, dentists still use amalgam without precautions, so the threat of mercury exposure continues. Dental mercury travels many pathways on its journey back into the environment. It starts when a dentist receives precapsulated dental amalgam. In each capsule, up to 900 milligrams of elemental mercury is separated from the other alloys. To make the final product, the capsule is vigorously shaken in a triturator to thoroughly mix all the elements. Occupational safety concerns arise because this heats the mercury, creating thousands of micrograms of mercury vapor, which are released upon opening the capsule. The used amalgam capsule still contains a small amount of mercury, so the ADA recommends the capsules be stored in an airtight container and collected by a hazardous waste company. Unfortunately, the majority of dentists toss the capsules into the trash. This mercury-contaminated trash will eventually travel to a landfill, where the mercury will continue its trek down into the soil. Back at the dental office, the freshly mixed amalgam is placed into the tooth. The dentist then carves away any excess material, while patients swallow some amalgam waste. Most is suctioned out and flows through a filtration system, but this system only captures a small percent of the larger pieces. The vast majority of much smaller pieces escape into the wastewater. A similar scenario plays out when dentists replace amalgam fillings. Many dentists clean out their filtration systems by dumping the captured mercury-tainted sludge down the drain. A study funded by the ADA estimated that amalgam fillings contribute up to 50% of the mercury found in wastewater. This contaminated water then flows to publicly owned water treatment plants. While efforts are made to remove the mercury from wastewater, most of it settles down into the sewage sludge, which is then taken and spread on land as fertilizer, or deposited in a landfill. In both scenarios, the mercury constantly off-gasses into the atmosphere and seeps into the ground. A percentage of the sewage sludge is also sent packing to incinerators. With over 200 tons of dental mercury in the mouths of Americans, even exhaling is a contributor of mercury to our atmosphere. Additionally, people with amalgam fillings serve as hosts for mercury's passage back into our environment through the excretion of human waste. Mercury's ride continues even after death. Crematories, which are unregulated and contain no filtering processes, are a growing vehicle for transporting mercury back into the atmosphere. When all the various pathways are accounted for, dental mercury from the United States contributes roughly 28.5 tons into the environment each year. The governments of the world are actively working together to reduce the amount of mercury released globally to protect human health. The first and foremost step to eliminating mercury released from dental amalgam is to discontinue the use of this toxic material. With the threat so great and the solutions so simple, it's time to restrict mercury's passport.
That gives a good overview of how it goes from the mouth to the environment. I can remember years ago when they first started doing that sludge idea. I thought, what a great use of that material. But, it's just not human waste. It's industrial waste. When we used to have processors for film, we would just dump that stuff down the drain. I think sometimes we would process, try to get the silver out of it. But most of the time those toxins, the chemicals dumped in, well, that says that and the mercury just being spread on our fields, which goes into the rivers and streams and back into the environment, back into the air. So not a good scenario. All right, UNEP, setting national objectives aiming at minimizing its use. This is the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and the IAOMT was there, and the United States has signed it. Whether it'll ever come into effect, I'm not sure. Promoting the use of cost-effective and clinically effective mercury-free alternatives for dental restorations. We have those. Encouraging representative professional organizations and dental schools to educate and train dental professionals and students of the use of mercury-free dental restoration alternatives and or promoting best management practices. One of the problems with getting change is that the ADA certifies the dental schools. When I went to Indiana, it was rated #1, and that's by the ADA. Now, if you start changing the rules of dental schools, go in here and say, hey, we're not going to do any more mercury fillings, these guys got to worry about the ratings, and the ratings means where do the students go, and where the student goes means where the money goes. So a lot of schools are very, very resistant, even though they understand the information, to change because the ADA controls them. Discouraging insurance policies and programs that favor dental amalgam use over mercury-free dental restorations, restricting the use of dental amalgam to its encapsulated form. I guess that would help. I mean, who doesn't use encapsulated mercury anymore? I can't imagine any other way to do it. But and promoting the use of best environmental practices in dental facility, reduce release of mercury and mercury compounds into the water and land. This is the Minamata Bay Convention. The reason it was done Minamata Bay, Japan, because that's where after World War II they had a great deal of poisoning. There's a lot of industry in this area, and mercury got into the water, the bay, and the people were eating the fish and getting extremely sick. And I think that was one of the first times when they understood or recognized that mercury was contaminating the fish and poisoning the people. What do you do with this mercury waste? Protecting the office environment. Obviously, rubber dam with mercury sludge on it. We see that every day. And this is what this is demonstrating is after the removal of the mercury, we take our gloves off and we it's hard to see right here, but this is a disposal can and the gloves are placed into that. So we take the dam, the gloves, and anything that's been contaminated and put it in a little trash can where the lid goes down. Not the best system in the world. The problem is this stuff still goes out into the trash. If you try to get this material recycled, there's so much volume, it's extremely expensive. A 5-gallon can is like $400 to get recycled, and it takes you a day to fill up a 5-gallon can, at least in our office, with the gloves and napkins or whatever the heck could have been contaminated. So it's not we don't have the good system right now. We first to admit it. This is Joe, and we all wear these little jobbers, and these are available from the IAOMT. You can see he's emptying his trash can into a 5-gallon can, and then this would go to the recyclers. And whenever we put that in here, you should have your mask on. This is a mask that protects you against mercury vapor. It's an industrial mask. It's got 2 breathing chambers, and we always use that. It doesn't do much for your hair, I admit that, ladies, but it does do a lot for your health. Dental office wastewater contains 1.5 pounds of mercury per year. That's a lot of mercury going out in the streams and rivers. It only takes 0.5 gram of mercury to contaminate 10-acre lake to a level that you can't eat the fish. Now, 0.5 gram of mercury is 1/2 thermometer. Now, we don't see many mercury thermometers anymore. You don't have them in schools, you don't have them in hospitals, but a lot of us remember mercury thermometers. There's not a whole lot of mercury that can contaminate a 10-acre lake. And this is a picture of my separator in the basement. It's a very simple contraption. This little thing down here, I hope you can see, this just unbolts, slides out. My Patterson guy then sticks another one in, and then I send that to Washington State where it gets recycled. And we do that about 3 times a year. So it's not a really big burden. I've forgotten what this contraption costs. I've had it for 20 years, but they're not very expensive. There will be some exhibitors here that'll have different models. There's several different companies. This is Rebec. That was probably the only guy out when I bought this. And I think this was Joe's, a little fuzzy, but that's his separator. So there's different varieties out there. They don't plug in. It's always all gravity. Very simple. So I haven't serviced it one time since I bought it. Just change out the filters. There's some diagrams of how they work, but effective. And a simple hookup. And then one thing I do is I bought my Patterson rep, Mark, one of those masks I showed you. So I don't know if he's using it or not. I hope he is. But whenever he's undoing one of these traps, changing the filters out, or for that matter, if he opens a unit and said, we don't get, starts working inside of that thing. He needs to have vinyl gloves on and a mask because there's a lot of mercury vapor that can be released from those things. These are some examples of line cleaners containing bleach or chlorine will increase the release of mercury from amalgam trap. Now you got to understand, our wastewater lines, not from the toilets, but from our units, are contaminated and coated with mercury stuff. So you got to be careful how you clean those. A lot of times they never are. So why are you supposed to eat humans? Why aren't we supposed to eat humans anymore? Because they contain mercury, toxic levels of mercury, thanks to all the fillings. Why is the risk? What is the risk? It means dental amalgam, mercury exposure, and human health risks throughout the lifespan. Okay. All silver-colored fillings are dental amalgams, we know that. And each and every one of these fillings is close to 45 to 55% mercury. Research has shown that mercury is continuously emitted from amalgam fillings, absorbed and retained in the body. Again, this chart I think we saw it earlier, but shows that in our mouth, our fillings are what would you say 80%, and our air and food is a slight 20%. Dental mercury exposure and risk. Toxic effects of mercury exposure vary by individual. One or a combination of symptoms can be present and can change over time. It can take many years to manifest. 67 million Americans, this is a recap, exceed the intake of mercury vapor considered safe by the EPA. 122 million Americans exceed the intake of mercury vapor considered safe by the California EPA. So a lot of mercury vapor being absorbed. This is a little hard to see, but I think this is where mercury settles in different parts of the body. Epigenetics of mercury, dental fillings. Growing volume of recently published scientific research is examining how mercury exposure, including that from dental amalgam fillings, can pose highly significant risk to individuals with specific genetic traits, including the CPOX4, APOE, we talked about that. And other polymorphisms. So our own body, our own differences, our own genetic makeup has a heck of a lot to do with what effects mercury will have on our bodies. Health conditions associated with dental mercury exposure. Again, you got antibiotic resistance. The gut, the bacteria in the gut gets antibiotic resistant and also mercury resistant. A lot of problems with the gut are due to mercury. And we're finding now that the gut is the brain of the body, second brain. A lot of serotonin and good things go on there. That's where our immune system is stemming. So if we don't have a healthy gut, you're not going to be a healthy person. But this, again, just kind of looks at all the things that have been associated with mercury poisoning or exposure. Well, there you go. Now Joe will be up next. I think we're taking a break. Is that correct? Yes, sir.